in some ways, we look at this and say, how does all this work together? How can all these different prophecies fit together? And the answer is, they work together perfectly. They work together perfectly. So we may have a little questions here and there about how exactly is this going to work? But you know what? This much I know, God will make it work. Because God is powerful and He's got a great plan. What is crucial is that we, as believers in Jesus Christ, live with a desire, even though it might be a little scary, with a desire to see the return of Jesus. 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 8. There is laid up for me the crown of righteousness. This is the Apostle Paul. It's getting towards the end of his life. He's saying this. He knows that death is coming. He's saying there's a crown waiting for me after death, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have loved His appearing. We long for the appearing of Jesus. There is going to be a day that is going to rock the world to its very foundation. A time in which the Bible describes it and compares it to a wine press, where grapes are crushed down. The Bible describes it as a tribulation. And at first, it's not going to seem so bad. In fact, for much of the world, maybe even from the church, it seems like it's fixing things. It's making things better. But God describes it as the greatest crisis that the world will see. Jesus, in the end, leads us to the book of Daniel in the Old Testament. And he describes the events, and he describes one of the main characters as an abomination that leads to desolation. Despite that bad, we are to long for the appearing of Jesus. Mark, our passage starts with this. But when you see the abomination of desolation standing where he ought not to be, let the reader understand. And I'm going to cut it off right there, mid-sentence. We'll come to the rest of the sentence, don't worry. Stop here already. This is looking back, if you want, and I'm going to encourage you later on today, this afternoon. I know lots of people here are going to that big skating carnival afterwards. So after the skating carnival, if you're going to that. Daniel 9, 11, 12. Go and read them. 3 interesting chapters. You can read 10, which is in the middle too. But 9, 11, and 12 in particular. This happens quickly after the lifetime of Daniel, that there's an event that's very similar to what Daniel describes, in which a Greek king rules Israel. His name is Antiochus Epiphanes. And he goes into the temple and he sets up a statue of Zeus, the Greek god, that kind of looks like the king. And he puts it in the middle of the temple, and it is described as an abomination in the place of worship. Where God should be worshipped, a false idol is set up in the name of a king. That king is miraculously overthrown. Someday, go home, look up the events that eventually lead to the Jewish festival that they celebrate in December. They light all the candles, you know, Hanukkah. That has to do with that. Anyways, God miraculously delivers people from this abomination. But Daniel doesn't see the full fulfillment when this guy goes into the temple. And Mark makes it clear that it's not finished with this gentleman. He picks up the theme and says the Greeks kind of give us a shadow of what is to come. But there's something more to happen. Now, he's just finished saying the temple's going to be destroyed. It was. There's moss sitting there. But now there's the temples, obviously. We're not really given any details there. But God will not be worshipped there. Something will be placed there that replaces God. We get a taste of this a few years later in the disciples' life. Now, as we've gone through this series, I've said this gets fulfilled a couple of different ways. One of the ways is in around the year 70 AD, and some people I know kind of get tired when I go off on my history rampages, and some people love it, but I'm going to do it for a second. There was a chief priest by the name of Phanai that is made chief priest. He is a horrible person. He's a political appointment. He's a Roman appointment. He is not a godly man. He goes into the temple. He does all sorts of desecrating things, and it leads to actually the Jews rebelling against him and rebelling against the Romans. That is the first kind of way this gets fulfilled. Keep him in mind. We're going to come to it. There's a very interesting connection in a couple of minutes. But it doesn't end there either. This man is called an abomination as well. But there is an abomination still to come. He has many names in Scripture, most famously Antichrist. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, there's a time of great rebellion, which sounds like what we've done the last couple of weeks. Then arise, and these are some of the names he's given in 2 Thessalonians, the man of lawlessness, or the son of destruction, or the man doomed to destruction. Doesn't sound like a very good title, does it? Sounds rather harsh. 2 Thessalonians then goes on to describe and says, the evil that is behind this man exists now. His evil is in the world, but it's being restrained by God himself. Being restrained by God himself. But the day will come where that restraint is loosed. The evil that exists now within a single person, or maybe even Satan incarnate, an evil that will reside in one place and be very powerful. We've looked at the last couple of weeks about a time of great trouble. It will end with a time of peace and security. In particular, find that in a couple of different spots, but Daniel makes it clear, and there's a few different spots in the New Testament. It will seem good. It will seem right. This man will seem like a man from God. A man from God. But up here, there's a part in brackets there. Let the reader understand. I always find that interesting. If you've got a red letter edition of the Bible, you know where it makes Jesus' words red. Some of them leave that little part in the parentheses in red. Clearly, Jesus didn't say that. If he'd said this, he would have said something, let the listener understand or something. This is Mark editorializing and trying to make it clear this is something important. Mark doesn't editorialize in the middle of Jesus' comments very often. But here he does. Understand why? Because they don't get it. In the early church, they weren't understanding what this was all about. If you go through 1st and 2nd Thessalonians, it's all about this. And they thought there was a political action that was going to come where Jesus would overthrow the Roman emperor. And they believed and were falling for people who were coming along and saying, do you know what? Jesus is out in the desert, or he's out there somewhere. He's starting to collect an army, and he sent me to collect money to buy weapons for him. And people were falling for it, and they were giving him money. I don't think Jesus needs our weapons. But they didn't understand. They didn't have the full understanding of this. And Mark, it's written about the same time as 1st and 2nd Thessalonians. He's trying to emphasize, hey, pay attention. This isn't going to end up like you think it's going to end up. It's not that Jesus is hiding out there, getting ready to attack. Understand, you're not even there yet. But do understand, the one is going to come along who will supplant God on his throne. He is going to make humanity the king. There are thrones that are proper for kings, but they should never take the place of God. And when they do, they are on the wrong throne. Let's keep going a little bit. Oh, no, do you know what? I don't have the next part on the slides. Go back and you can read starting in verse 14. It was way too long. God, I took it out of the slides because it was getting lengthy. But basically, there is a description there saying, run. If you see this happening, if you see this abomination on the throne, run. Don't go back and get your stuff. Pray that doesn't happen in winter. Feel bad for pregnant women who are going to get stuck not being able to run. Run. Read Daniel 11 again. Full description of what's going to come. Describes a time of war followed by some peace, and then this king who's setting himself up as God. It sounds exactly like Mark. But then a time of great struggle. And Jesus is concerned for their safety. Now, I mentioned this guy who I said remember. His name was Savannah. He was this high priest who was an abomination. He came onto the throne 68 AD. He was this abomination. And the Jewish people made a mass decision to rebel. And so they started gathering all the people together. And they said, come to Jerusalem. Live inside the city walls. God will not let his temple fall. Come inside where it's safe. And the Christians who were living in Jerusalem actually took up this part of Mark, and they went the opposite way. They fled the city and ran to the hill country. They even left the borders of Israel. They went just outside. They went to a town called Pella, which is in the hill countries, just like it's described here, and they hid there. As they're hiding, Titus, the emperor, our emperor-to-be, son of the emperor, marches in with a huge army and marches straight to Jerusalem. He encircles the city, then his father dies and he has to run off to become the emperor. He leaves his army there, and they starve the people for 2 years, until finally they're able to breach the walls. Those who had fled and followed Jesus' command survived. Those who stayed in the city died. Now, what was interesting as well, those who fled immediately were saved. Those who waited a little while to see how this panned out, it says, pray that it doesn't happen in winter. Some stayed until winter and then decided to take off. But the rivers on the opposite side from where the army was coming were so swollen they couldn't get across. They were forced to turn back. It sounds eerily like what Mark is describing, doesn't it? This is a reminder to us, and now I've said before, the parts that happen with the fall of the temple are shadowing, they're shadows of what is to come. They are a reminder to us that God is still acting in history. How is this going to work for us? You see somebody who becomes an abomination of the temple, does that mean everybody should flee? Should run to the, I don't know. I'm not entirely sure. I gotta be honest with you, even after studying for a long time, I don't have a full answer of what this, it says specifically Judea, but the point is that some will be distracted by things. It says some are going to run back and get their stuff. Don't worry about your stuff. Your stuff doesn't matter as much as the things of God. Don't worry about that. Some people are going to be stuck because of health and family obligation. Don't worry about those things. Do you know what? God is at work, and what's most scary of all is some people will not run because they are deceived by the one who is the abomination. Not in the sense that necessarily they're always going to be deceived, but because they pause and wait and wonder, could this be Jesus? He obviously is not appearing of evil. Don't expect this guy to show up with horns and a tail and dressed in red or something like that. He is going to appear to be good because the church is even going to look and say, is this guy for real? Is this guy for real? Whatever the case, run away, because there will be suffering. Do not seek the suffering. In the book of Revelations, it gives heaven's point of view of this. And in it, the martyrs who die in this time are standing before the throne of God asking for justice. And God says, just be a little patient longer. Do you know what? For those who die, For those who are martyred, they go to glory. It's not that it's the end of their story, they go on to something greater, but don't seek it. Don't chase after it. And the Lord did not cut short the days, no human being would be saved, but for the sake of the elect whom he chose, he shortened the days. Daniel, again. Great war. Time of horror. It's chapter 11. Chapter 12 starts with this. At that time shall arise Michael, who's this archangel, the great prince who has charge of your people, and there shall be a time of trouble such as never been seen since there was a nation till that time. But at that time your people shall be delivered, everyone whose name shall be found written in the book. 1 Thessalonians starts to talk about those who will be called to meeting Jesus in the air, but then he backs up and he tells a little bit before that. While people are saying there is peace and security, then suddenly destruction will come upon them as labor pains upon a pregnant woman, and they will not escape. But you are not in darkness, brothers, for that day to surprise you like a thief. Catch that whole bit? We're not in darkness, we're in light. We'll be caught up in that light, in that darkness. Revelation chapter 7, incredible passage from heaven's point of view. That there's this great start to difficulties, the rising of things, and then all of a sudden the Apostle John looks out, and what does he see after this? I looked, and behold, a great multitude that no one can number, from every nation, from all tribes and peoples and languages, standing before the throne, before the Lamb, clothed in white robes and palm branches in their hands. What happens to them? All of a sudden, John looks up as all these troubles are occurring, and there's the church in heaven, before the throne. The church will stand before God. Basically, God cuts off what is happening in the world to save his church. Now, the story of this world is not quite done yet. We keep reading. There are passages about trouble still on this earth. There's stories about judgment that is to come. But the main point here is there is a miraculous intervention to save the church of God. And we often will throw around a word called rapture in Christian circles. That's not a word we find anywhere in the Bible, but it's a way to describe God supernaturally saving his church. How exactly it works and when exactly it works and all those details get debated endlessly. It might be fun to debate, but in the end, the main thing is to understand, above all, God will save his church. Some people see this passage in Mark as maybe it's not quite the rapture. It may be, it may not be. The passage we're going to look at next week kind of sounds like it too. Doesn't matter a lot. We're not going to get caught up in the details today, mostly because I have 5 minutes left in the sermon. Or 5 minutes until people start walking out on me anyways. I'd love to keep going on it, actually. We could spend hours talking about it. But I want us to walk away with one thing: God will save his church. God will save his church. God will intervene in the bleakest of moments for those he loves. And in the bleakest of moments, God is active. God's love is still powerful. So stay on guard. Go earlier in the passage of Mark 13, the stuff we looked at last week. I had a section on the outline called Be on Guard. He says almost the exact same thing in our passage today, so I called it Still on Guard. Remarkable little thing. If anyone says to you, look, here's the Christ, or look, there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform signs and wonders to lead astray, if possible, the elect. But be on guard. I have told you all things beforehand. Be on guard. Do not let anyone convince you of wrong things. If you're going off to find Jesus in the desert or something like that, hang on. Obviously, as we get towards the end, the church even is going to question, have we misread? Have we misunderstood Jesus? Did we miss his coming? I have good news. Matthew says this almost verbatim the same. Matthew quotes Jesus almost exactly identical, but he adds 2 verses at the end. I want to read those 2 verses out of Matthew. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. You won't miss it. He's first saying the same thing. Don't run off just because you're worried. Don't fall for every little trick in the book. You won't miss it. You won't be able to miss it. Don't think, oh, Jesus forgot to tell me. Just because somebody else says, I saw the signs, don't worry that you missed it, because you won't miss it. You won't miss it. It'll happen that way. How do you know you won't miss it? We joined on Friday night much of the world in a big discussion. A discussion that seems to have passed through the entire world this week. And it had to do with this dress. Anybody else get into this discussion in their house? I don't know. I saw this dress on TV. If you don't know the debate, don't get too hung up on it. But I saw this dress. First time we looked at it, we had a boy-girl division. The picture on TV, all the boys thought looked white and gold. And all the women thought was blue and black. Now, to me, this picture looks blue and black. Anybody else hear this debate this week? Do people know what I'm talking about? Okay, big debate where people are looking at this dress and some are seeing 2 colors and some other people are seeing 2 others. And so what is it? It's partially because of the lighting behind it and some of the background stuff. And there might be some gender differences too as to how you see it. To me, I don't know. People are looking at and questioning, so what color exactly is that dress? It's from Scotland. If you see the original dress in a catalog or out of the store though, there is no question that it's blue or black. Everybody sees it as blue and black. Why am I pointing this out? You want to know the truth? Don't look at the imitations, look at the original. Know God. You want to make sure you're not fooled by anyone. Know God. Know Jesus. You won't be fooled by the opposite if you know the original. The only way to be sure whether something is real or not is to know the original. It will seem like wisdom to stay in the city with this one who is called the abomination but appears to be God-like. He seems legitimate. So know the real deal. Know the real deal. Know Scripture. Know prayer. Be a person of worship. Know reality. We don't just focus on this abomination. We focus on Jesus. On Friday night, we had our last night of hockey, and I gave an illustration there at our hockey event that we were doing a drill at the beginning of our night. I was in the corner, and a skater was coming out by the blue line, and I had to pass the puck out to the blue line. Because it was drilled, there were pucks kind of everywhere. And I was kind of looking ahead as I was getting ready to pass it out and realized there's a puck between me and the guy I was passing to, and I went through my head, oh, I better not hit the puck in the middle. I have to make sure. Do you know what I did? As I came to make this pass, I was staring at the puck. There's a huge wide open space, and I'm staring at this puck, and I'm trying to pass it out. I hit the thing that I was staring at. Why did I do that? Because that's where my eyes were focused. We need to keep our eyes focused on the right thing. So what's the point of all this? God's grace and God's wrath are very real. I'm going to tell you, for the believer, grace wins. Do you want to know why loving God and being on the right side matters so much? I'm going to bring this verse up again next week. This is from 2 Thessalonians 2, verse 8. And when the lawless one will be revealed, then the lawless one will be revealed, whom the Lord Jesus will kill with the breath of his mouth, and bring to nothing the appearance of his coming. We are told this is the guy we should be scared of. I'm going to tell you, he's not the guy we should be scared of. We have a God who is powerful. We did this hockey event on Friday. Do you know what? I'm getting really old out there. Some of our players are some are pretty good, but some of them, barely skate. We struggle a lot. Yesterday was the 5th anniversary of the Sidney Crosby's golden goal of the Canadian Olympic team. Do you know what? This lawless one versus Jesus is kind of like our little church hockey team playing that Canadian gold medal team. There's no competition. There's no competition. We need to be on the right side because there's no match. This Antichrist has no chance. Jesus wins the battle before it even happens. We need to be on the right side with Jesus. We need to love him. We need to be on side with the Savior. I'm going to invite our worship team to lead us as we sing about that.